Welcome to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today because, wow, we are looking at a day that is undoubtedly going to be studied in history books for decades. July 7, 2026 was not your average news cycle. I mean, it was a day of absolute chaos. The global order basically experienced seismic tremors on almost every single continent simultaneously. We're talking explosive military retaliations, stunning diplomatic ultimatums at the very highest levels of global alliances, secret intelligence leaks, and a historic reversal in the world of international sports. There's a lot of incredibly fascinating ground to cover today, and we're going to break it all down step by step to understand exactly how these global fault lines are shifting. Okay, let's dive into our roadmap for today. We're going to hit 5 main topics. First, Middle East on the brink. Second, NATO's diplomatic shockwaves. Third, internal pressures and conflicts. Fourth, transit triumphs and tragedies. And finally, number 5, the Olympic reversal. All right, kicking things off with part 1, Middle East on the brink, escalations from Hormuz to Damascus. We are starting right at the epicenter of the day's most urgent events. To really understand the geopolitical balance of power right now, you have to look at this incredibly rapid sequence of events in the Strait of Hormuz. Step 1, we saw coordinated missile attacks on 3 commercial vessels. This notably included the Qatari liquefied natural gas, or LNG tanker Al Rukayat. Now that's a massive deal, mostly because it marks the very first attack on a Qatari vessel since hostilities began back in February. Then, Step 2, Washington immediately responded by officially revoking the temporary sanctions waivers that had been granted to Iranian oil under the Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding. Step 3, kinetic military action. U.S. forces actually unleashed powerful retaliatory airstrikes on Iranian coastal defense sites. And finally, Step 4, as tensions literally peaked at the global governance level, Iran categorically rejected a diplomatic proposal submitted by the UAE to the International Maritime Organization. That UAE plan was specifically designed to create non-Iranian-controlled transit mechanisms along the Omani coast just to bypass Tehran's leverage. So the crucial point here is the sheer severity of this military response. These U.S. strikes were not small, symbolic gestures. They specifically targeted Iranian air defense, coastal surveillance, and missile launch installations. Heavy explosions rocked major Iranian maritime hubs, specifically Bandar Abbas, Bandar Sirik, and Koshim Island. I mean, this is a massive projection of force right in the heart of Iran's strategic maritime territory. And you know, that escalation in Hormuz, it didn't just happen in a vacuum. It was rippling across other regional friction points on that exact same day. First, following massive state ceremonies in Tehran and Qom, the body of the late Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei was flown to Najaf, Iraq. This effectively shifted his massive funeral procession through the country's Shiite holy sites. Meanwhile, over in Syria, 2 consecutive explosions detonated near the Four Seasons Hotel in central Damascus, injuring at least 18 people. The timing here is absolutely critical. This happened during a historic state visit by French President Emmanuel Macron. This was the first visit by an EU head of state since Bashar al-Assad was ousted in 2024. Fortunately, Macron was away from the hotel at the time. And finally, the Lebanese health ministry confirmed an Israeli strike on a vehicle in southern Lebanon killed 4 people. The IDF stated the target was intentionally approaching its active security buffer zone and posed an immediate threat. All these simultaneous friction points, they just show how incredibly fragile the region's security architecture has become in a single 24-hour period. Let's move to Section 2 and see how this builds. NATO's diplomatic shockwaves, looking at shifting alliances in Ankara. So kicking off the NATO gathering, President Donald Trump delivered a pretty stunning diplomatic ultimatum. He explicitly renewed his demands for the United States to take control of Greenland. And the leverage he's using here is massive. He's actively threatening to withdraw American troops stationed across Europe if member states refuse to support this geopolitical shift. This is a demand that strikes right at the very core of the NATO alliance's stability and its operational footprint in Europe. Now, what's really interesting about this is the cascading friction it creates. On one hand, we have a major move by the U.S. to appease Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. The Trump administration announced it's going to lift the 2020 sanctions imposed on Ankara over its purchase of Russian S-400 defense systems. Plus, they are preparing to restore Turkey to the highly advanced F-35 fighter jet program. But simultaneously, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu reacted swiftly and very publicly, criticizing this exact deal. Netanyahu is warning that this threatens the Middle East power balance, arguing that Turkey cannot be categorized as a friendly state due to Erdogan's active support for Hamas and ties to the Muslim Brotherhood. It's just a perfect representation of how a diplomatic win in one column creates immediate geopolitical anxiety in another. Moving on to Section 3, Internal Pressures and Conflicts. We're looking at economic fractures and civil war here. Let's step away from international diplomacy for a second and look inside a nation's borders. We've got this leaked European state intelligence report that gives us a fascinating and honestly stark look inside Russia's domestic stability. We are looking at a classic cause and effect scenario that's pushing Russian lenders toward what intelligence is actually calling an explosive banking crisis. The cause? The Kremlin is forcing domestic banks to continually absorb subsidized loans for state defense companies. And the effect? Extreme structural strain on these domestic lenders. The banks are essentially being cannibalized to artificially fuel the war economy, and this leak suggests the whole foundation is acutely unstable right now. Over in Western Europe, we have a very different kind of crisis, and it really boils down to just one number: 0.7%. That represents France's newly projected economic growth for 2026, which slipped drastically following a devastating June heatwave. This economic and environmental fallout triggered a severe political crisis. Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu's administration actually faced a high-stakes no-confidence vote in the French National Assembly, driven entirely by opposition deputies protesting the government's response to the heatwave. The government narrowly survived, but the fracture remains highly visible, and it's signaling potential economic turbulence for the broader Eurozone. Another tragic number from July 7th is 15. Over in Sudan, the brutal, escalating civil war has heavily intensified its air campaigns. Human rights monitors reported that separate drone strikes killed at least 15 civilians in North Kordofan state. And in that exact same region, the Sudanese military announced they shot down a Chinese-manufactured FH-95 drone. That marks the third such drone down recently, really underscoring the devastating intersection of foreign-supplied technology and domestic civilian casualties. Let's shift gears to Section 4, Transit Triumphs and Tragedies, covering an aviation mystery and some major maglev progress. The day also brought a highly urgent aviation mystery. K2 Airways Flight 1732, which is a Boeing 737-400 cargo jet, completely vanished from radar off the Pakistani coastline. There were 5 crew members on board when the plane disappeared, and aviation authorities immediately launched massive emergency search operations. It is a really stark reminder of the ever-present risks in global transit and the intense immediate mobilization required when communications suddenly just go dark. And this brilliantly illustrates the duality of the day's transit news. While authorities were frantically searching the waters off Pakistan, Japan finally broke through an immense logistical barrier. Astonishingly, after nearly a decade of intense environmental gridlock, Shizuoka Governor Yasutomo Suzuki officially gave the green light for the construction of the crucial Shizuoka section of Japan's new ultra-high-speed maglev train line connecting Tokyo and Nagoya. This paves the way for one of the most advanced infrastructure projects in modern history to finally move forward, which is going to fundamentally transform how fast human beings can travel overland. Finally, we arrive at Section 5, the Olympic reversal, where the IOC lifts a historic ban. For this last segment, we're pivoting from infrastructure to global culture. The International Olympic Committee made a historic, sweeping decision that completely rewrites the landscape of the upcoming Games. Let's trace the steps here. Step 1. For years, Russian athletes faced severe restrictions and blanket bans. These stemmed first from massive state-sponsored doping violations and then were compounded by the 2022 invasion of Ukraine. Step 2. On July 7th, the IOC formally voted to lift that blanket ban. Which brings us to Step 3. The result of this vote means Russian athletes are now officially cleared to compete, and importantly, they can compete under their own national flag at the upcoming 2028 Summer Olympics in Los Angeles. This effectively ends years of sporting isolation. So, from military strikes in the Strait of Hormuz to diplomatic ultimatums at NATO, and from economic fractures in France and Russia to this monumental Olympic reversal, July 7th, 2026 was a day that truly shook the foundations of the global order. Which brings us to the ultimate question we have to ask ourselves. With alliances actively shifting, conflicts escalating in real time, and certain global ties unexpectedly restoring, how will the tremors of this single day reshape the geopolitical road to 2028? The world is moving incredibly fast right now, and every single one of these updates is a piece of that puzzle. Keep your eyes open and keep asking questions. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I will see you next time as we continue to unpack the world around us.